Alright, folks, bear with me if this is a little rough. Okay, this is going to be my first video. The name of this show is going to be Fathi's Fulmination. Now, I know some of you is probably scratching your head going, what the hell is a fulmination? Well, basically, it means rant. So, Fathi's rantings. I'm Fathi. Fathi is Arabic for Vincent. I actually started going by Fathi shortly after I became Muslim because, quite frankly, I got tired of being called Winston. Um, so this show is going to be a culmination. Um, Sometimes I'm going to cover some really very deep, in-depth stuff, and other times it's going to be nonsensical ranting, just me blowing things off the top of my head. Um, for our very first video, though, I really want to cover something because it's something that's been on my mind for a while. A lot of people have covered it in different ways. I have found a lot of the people that have covered it are not what America considers white. And I also want to cover it because this is 2020. It's a census year. I know a lot of people think I should probably start off by talking about the coronavirus. Quite frankly, I think there's enough different views and videos on it that I don't need to cover it. So, having said that, our first video today for Fathi's Fulmination, welcome, is going to be why is white identity a myth? Now, as I said a minute ago, this is a topic that has been covered by a lot of different people. Al Jazeera did a brief article about it. There's been different books on it, but I don't think I've actually seen a video about this. If there is one out there, feel free to link me. I'd love to watch it. So let's get into this. Now, I'm just going to come right out and say it. White identity is a myth. Okay. Now, you don't have to have read a lot of books to understand this. This is very, very basic, observational. Okay. That is the essence of science, is seeing something, observing it, and then learning from that which you see. So, going from there, white identity, or the concept of being white, is a tool that is being used and has been used since its inception to perpetuate racism in order to divide the bottom part of the pyramid, the lower class. And we'll come back to that, so remember that point. From everything that I have searched, everything that I've run across in the different writers and the different articles regarding this concept that white identity is a myth, the concept of whiteness did not exist before the 1700s. That's a fact. I dare you to challenge it. Now, having said that, if you look at any construct that you want, scientifically speaking, there is no field of science that backs the concept of a singular white race. None. Does not exist. And if you're white and you're watching this and it's pissing you off, good. Now, what exactly constitutes white? Right here, right at the very beginning, in the definition, we just start unraveling this very concept of white. Now, nobody seems to agree on what white is. Now, according to Peckerwoods, neo-Nazis, KKK, Council of Concerned Citizens, whatever, blatant racist white person you want to come across, according to them, okay, white is someone of European descent. But those same people who give you that definition, that have European descent, they say it's of European descent, who have European features, will tell you that a Puerto Rican is not white. Why? There are Puerto Ricans who are same skin tone. They have European ancestry. They come from Spain. The original Native Americans of Puerto Rico were basically wiped out. It was a genocide. Christopher Columbus brags about it. Now, moving on from there, that actually though, that concept that Puerto Ricans are not white is a concept that is shared by the U.S. government, and you can see that in the census or in any EEOC survey that you take at the end of a job application. It will ask if you are a white Hispanic. So it differentiates the two. Moving on. The Europeans themselves, pre-colonial era, by pre-colonial I mean before the U.S. colonies, the Europeans themselves actually prided themselves on their country of origin. And if you go outside of those that colonized the U.S. and you go to the actual European people themselves, they did not identify as being European. They identified as the country of origin. So, again, the definition of whiteness is very blurred. Now, we're going to go to the actual United States Census. Okay? Now, hold on. I don't want y'all to think that, I'm just ripping this out of the Wikipedia page or something. I have here an actual United States Census, okay, paper, the actual paperwork. So we're going to open this and I'm going to read their actual definition. I know what it already says, okay, but we're going to break this out. So in black and white, plain as day, we can see how the U.S. government defines the very term white. Okay, United States Census. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, I see the government is getting lazier now. They don't want to actually send out the paperwork. So we'll just have to summarize here. And you can go and fact check me on this by all means. Post down below and let me know if I'm wrong. I'm not, but feel free to check. So the United States Census lists race, okay, the categories for the U.S. Census as reflective of a social definition recognized in the United States, in this country. Um, Furthermore, okay, they go on to say that the racial terms do not conform to any, and I quote, biological, anthropological, or genetic criteria. So, according to their own words of a U.S. government entity, it is not backed by science. Going further, according to this definition, and this is also seen, you'll see it on your different job applications. All of you have seen it, I'm sure. Okay. But especially in the U.S. Census, it actually lists white to include people of Middle Eastern or North African descent. Now, if you really want to get into that, start looking at the countries that are in North Africa, and you'll see how loose this definition is. But I'm only grazing this massive topic. Okay, this is just the very tip of the iceberg. So, moving on. Going by the very words that is used, the terminology that is created by the U.S. government's own organization, the U.S. Census Bureau, there is no backing in science for the term white. None. Okay? So, it says biological or genetic. Now, let us just pause and reflect on this for a moment, okay? Because, I mean, we all have a basic understanding of biological, but what is the definition of genetic? Okay? I'm going to go over these for you. There's two. One, relating to genes or heredity. Okay? It gets more interesting. Two, relating to origin or arising from a common origin. So by the very definition, it is saying they do not have the same ancestry. And is not even related to their genetic makeup. Now, lastly, they use the term anthropological. Okay? For those that don't know, anthropology is the study of human biological and physiological characteristics and their evolution. Now, that's a lot of big words put together, but basically, it's just a repeat of what I've already said, that the blood, the DNA, the genetic history, the way that their ancestors evolved is different. And this is further proven if you go to a DNA company, pick one, it does not matter, roll the dice and pick one out of a hat, Ancestry.com, Simply DNA, whatever. Any DNA company you want. You send in your DNA, and when it comes back, I guarantee you, unequivocally, it will not come back and say Joe Blow is white. Why? Because there's no such thing. Different groups or clusterings, if you will, of people of European ancestry have different genetic markers. Okay? There's differences in their appearance. There's differences in their background and how they came around. They are different people. So, how then did this concept of white come to the U.S.? How? We all know how. I covered it in the introduction. Not to be a smartass, but okay, I did do some research. I did, try to look for some of the background to this, and frankly, the general consensus is that this concept of white did not exist before the 1700s. Okay, the first time this concept is really seen in legal documentation is arguably in the Naturalization Act of 1790, unless, of course, you want to go over the Constitution, which is iffy, or the Federalist Papers, which really doesn't talk about it that much. But the real enactment and putting it into a kind of legal precedent was the Naturalization Act of 1790, where it determined who had the criteria to become or be considered a U.S. citizen. And this also brings in a really fun fact for another topic I'm going to cover another day. All of us that came from like the poor white background, that our families were not the upper echelon, yet y'all were not considered U.S. citizens under the Naturalization Act of 1790. Okay, just to make a kind of nod, there is a great book out there. Y'all should all look into it. See if you can get it at your local library if you can't afford it. It's called The Invention of the White Race. It's by Theodore Allen. Now, in this book, Theodore Allen does cover how the upper echelon slave owners actually created this concept of white identity to divide the indentured servants, the poor whites that worked for their freedom, and those that had their freedom worked for next to nothing. Like they did not even get paid enough to feed themselves most of the time. And the black slaves. And they did this deliberately because they feared an uprising from the black slaves and the indentured servants. So they thought, if we can make this group here, the indentured servants, or the poor white workers, not the same thing. It's two different groups, although they work together on the same fields. If we can get these two groups, these white workers, to feel like they are different, that they are superior to this other group, then they will feel a connection to us, the owners of the plantation, and maybe they'll defend us if there's a revolt. Now, I know some of y'all are wondering if, the credibility of Theodore Allen. Feel free to look that up. But if you look further, this very same practice was utilized not just during the slave time, but then after the Civil War. And Dr. King himself specifically talks about this in his speech after the march from Selma to Montgomery, where he emphatically details how the elitist of the South after the Civil War became terribly frightened because there was a populist movement, there was a populist leader, mind you, most likely a black leader, and that is something else that I'm going to cover in another topic, who was trying to unite poor whites and blacks of the South together. Well, The elitist, or I believe Dr. King refers to them as the bourbon elitist, um, they could not have this. It was not something that they could have. And Dr. King goes on to talk about how the poor whites were then again, in a manner of speaking, mind you, victimized because they were fed this lie, this Jim Crow concept, which was created to once again divide the poor white from the poor black. Now, before we wrap this up, I want to say, okay, the reason that I am covering the concept that white identity is a myth is because, according to their definitions, any definition that you want, any, I am considered by their constructs as white, which is why I will not go into personally the other areas and the misconceptions of a these other identities that they say that exist, because I don't feel that I should, as it is not something that I feel is my place. Moving on, I know a lot of you is probably thinking to yourself, okay, so white identity is a myth. So what? What's your point? What are we going to do now? Very simple. I have always said, when it concerns particularly matters like this, and if you're going to talk about topics like this, you really have to have some kind of action, something that people can actually do. Because words are fine and dandy. One, okay, stop. If you look at me and you feel like you relate to me because of my skin complexion, then hear me very carefully and stop identifying yourself as white. When you go, and if you are going to fill out the U.S. Census Bureau, I beg you, check other. You, as a white person, are continuing this construct. You are helping the system, the racist system, by identifying as white. Stop. Stop identifying as white in your post. Stop identifying as white in your conversations. Stop identifying as white in your job applications. Stop identifying as white. Now, to those of you who would be watching who do not identify with me because of my skin complexion, I give you the same advice, but different. Stop labeling people of my general complexion or people similar to my complexion as white. Stop using the term. Think of something else. Think of another term, and don't use Caucasian, because that plays into the system, the conceptuality of white superiority that was created in the early 1800s. Okay? If you want to talk about the racist system, the racial system, you have to understand the history. You have to understand how it was constructed. You have to understand the terminology and the tools that are used. Several of the civil rights leaders themselves talked about this. You cannot continue to use the terminology, the words, and the definitions that are created by the racial racist system of this government and then complain about the racist racial system of this government. Stop using their definitions. Create new definitions. Refuse to use their words. As an example, I myself no longer identify as white. If someone asks me if I'm white, I'm like, I refuse to even answer. I do not see myself as white. First and foremost, I see myself as Muslim. That's what I identify as. As to the rest, I don't know. No idea. Does it have anything to do with anything? No, not really. There are plenty of people that grew up the exact same way that I did, in the same kind of backgrounds, the same kind of family construct, that are completely different color. So the entire thing is a lie. And that is my video. I hope it was informative. I hope that y'all got something out of it. And I encourage you so strongly, stop using this term. You want to fight the system? Then let's be practical about it and stop using their terminology. There are more of us than them.